We assumed the shorthanded Raptors were in for a world of pain to start the season. But so far, the rebuilding Raps have proven us wrong, outperforming expectations everywhere but the win column. You might call it the perfect tank. Toronto's near 60-loss pace doesn't do its collective effort justice. A 14-7 record against the spread tells more of the story for an overachieving squad that's been the underdog in every game. The Raptors have won more quarters than they've lost while losing more than 70% of their games. They've lost as many games at the buzzer as the rest of the league combined. What's promising about the Raptors start, other than the boost to their lottery odds, of course, is that unlike the overachieving Nets, for example, Toronto's mostly been fueled by young players who will form the foundation of its future. Now, predictably, that youth has also been a contributing factor in the team turning so many quality efforts into quality losses. For example, the Raptors turn the ball over way too often. But the big picture view looks promising, as does the potential to pair Scottie Barnes with another franchise-changing talent like Cooper Flagg or Dylan Harper. But here's the part lottery-obsessed fans may not want to hear. Given how competitive the Raptors have been while decimated by injury, and how pathetic the Eastern Conference remains, the full-strength version of this team might be too good to tank. Could this be the start of something? Or as they get healthier, might the Raptors get creative to keep the tank rolling on? And with that, welcome to the Unfiltered Show presented by Under Armour and Curry Brand. I've got the Curry 12 Dub Nations on. They look and feel great. Our guests today, making her Unfiltered Show debut, it's Keeks. And coming back for a second time, basketball supervising editor here at theScore, Michael Chandler. We just call him Chandler.
Thank you for having me. Keeks, did you get a pair of those nice-looking Under Armours there?
Unfortunately, I did not. I think there was only one to give away, apparently.
I did not get a pair either, but I am a 10.5, 11 on a good day.
Well, everybody wants them. Everybody
I'll take a
wants
size
them.
6 kids, thank you.
All right, let's get right into it here. Start with the monologue topic. All of us Toronto people. The overarching, I think, opinion coming into this year was that it was going to be a tank. It was going to be a rebuilding year. I mean, that wasn't opinion. Masai Ujiri came out and called it a rebuilding year. Darko Rajakovic came out and said it's process over results, right? And the record indicates that everything's going according to plan, right? They're 6-15. They have a bottom 5 record. But as I was mentioning and rattling off some of those stats in the monologue, they have outperformed expectations in a lot of ways without winning. So going back to that kind of question I asked at the beginning, Keeks, we can start with you. Mm-hmm. Are the full-strength Raptors too good to tank in this Eastern Conference? And might they have to get creative to keep the tank rolling on once they get healthy?
Honestly, I don't think so.
Right.
As much as it's fun to think that they're going to be too good to tank or that they can be competitive as soon as they're healthy. But we haven't seen enough of a sample size, even with the three of Barnes, Barrett, and Quick last year. In and out with the first part I think that they played was with Siakam. They had maybe a 10-game stretch with the core available, and we didn't really see much from there. Yeah. There was some fun parts, but they were still only a 500 team. It wasn't amazing. We don't have a timeline for when Quickly's going to be back either, which means we don't really know when that's going to be. I think they have one of the hardest schedules in December. I know it'll get easier later, but the rest of the East is so bad. The bad teams are overachieving. The Nets are overachieving. I think they're not going to be worse than the Jazz, Pels, or Wizards, unfortunately. Yeah. I don't know. I think it'll be a fun bottom 8 record.
Bottom 8, all right. So that comes
not bottom 4, yeah.
Yeah, and that's where it gets tricky, right? Because again, if you're looking at this as a rebuilding or a tank year, the worst team in the league and the third worst team in the league have the same odds of the number 1 pick. The difference is the worst team can fall no lower than 5th. At 3rd, you can fall as low as 7th. Once you get to the bottom 8, don't get me wrong, you can still win the lottery, but you can also finish 9th. The chances of getting an impact player aren't exactly
they were never going to be worse than the Jazz, Pels, or Wizards.
And this is the thing. And that to me is fine. But now where I'm starting, I don't know, worried's a weird way to put it, because it's we're worried the young guys might actually be good, but okay, they're not going to be worse than the injury-decimated Pels, the Jazz, the Wizards, but now it's what if once they get rolling, they might be better than the Bulls. They're going to be better than the Nets. Chandler, what are your thoughts here?
Are they too good to tank? Yo, slow down Bobby Valentino. They're 6-15. They're 1-11 on the road, the worst mark in the league.
Yep.
Granted, they're a lot more enjoyable to watch, and they keep you watching until the fourth quarter. It's a lot more fun to watch than the late era Pascal Siakam, OG Anunoby hero ball teams. And, you know, we're sort of hearkening back to the halcyon days of Masai Ujiri and Bobby Webster unearthing draft steals with the likes of Jamal Shed, Jonathan Mobo, Jamison Battle, and lately Jacoby Walter. But this is still a 6-15 team. Are they too good? No. What are we even talking about?
They lost
right
their
now?
first 10 games on the road.
And they, you know, sorry to cut you off. And they had a really difficult schedule. And like Keek said, they have a difficult schedule in December, and it's going to ease up. I think their remaining schedule is 13th in strength of schedule, so middle of the pack. And granted, I also think teams like maybe the Nets and the Bulls and the Hornets are going to worsen as the season endures. But with all due respect to Emmanuel Quickley, who I think has played 3 games, and Kelly Olynyk and Cowboy Bruce Brown, who have played no games between them. This is not the 93-94 Chicago Bulls winning 55 games without Michael Jordan. And you could perhaps make the argument that the aforementioned rookie quartet are giving them the same chances or almost the same chances of winning the games as they would if Quick and Olynyk and Bruce Brown were in there.
The more minutes they play with 3 or 4 rookies on court together at the same time, the more we know they're not going to be too good to
Right.
win.
And I think that's the perfect marriage. That's the perfect balance of both worlds, right? The best of both worlds, where you're developing young guys, they're playing well, but you're still losing. Talking about the Raptors here on the Unfiltered Show, presented by Under Armour and Curry Brand. We can bring up a stat board here where this is kind of what I'm talking about, though. Like, you look at some of the reasons why they are 6-15, Chandler. You keep bringing up that record. It's like they have not had their full strength starting 5 in any game. They've missed multiple starters in 15 of their first 21. I think I mentioned it last week as well. They've been the underdog in every single game they played. I get what you're saying. Don't get me wrong. I don't think this team is good.
No.
But when you consider how competitive they've been, like, you know, there's teams that lose a lot of games because they kind of hang around games, but they're not truly in them. I mentioned in the monologue, they've won more quarters than they've lost. To me, that's indicative of a team that is actually capable of competing night to night, not just hanging around. And again, they're not the 93-94, well, you said Bulls. I think Jordan was actually retired that year. So they were still a good team that year, but they weren't quite a juggernaut.
That was my point. Like, what they did without them.
Right.
Won 55 games. Scotty came third in MVP voting.
Yeah.
Anyways.
That was more like the 1920 Raptors without Kawhi. But
1920.
That was the most fun Raptors year, by the way.
Yeah. But my point is I think there's a middle ground here. Like, they're not good, to your point, but they're better than 6-15, and all the underlying numbers support that. Keeks, I know you got some of those numbers as well. And so my point is just like, I'm not saying they won't tank. I'm just saying they might have to get creative to keep that tank rolling on, because as these guys get healthy, as teams like Brooklyn start falling off, even the Chicagos of the world, Detroit, if they're not doing great as the year rolls on and they shift into tank, like there are projection systems out there where it shows the 10th seed in the East maybe having 33 wins. If the underlying numbers for this Raptors team kind of bear out over an 82-game season, they're going to start regressing to the mean and winning some of these games they've lost unless they get creative, maybe hold guys out longer than they need to. To Keeks' point, maybe it's like, no, you know what? Yeah, Bruce Brown's back, but we want the 4 rookies to play more. Like, they're going to have to do things like that. That's all I'm saying. Because if they go full throttle and get healthy in this Eastern Conference, they might accidentally win 34 games. It doesn't mean they're good. It just means they're too good to tank.
I think even if they do get to a 34-win mark, which I don't think they will, it'll balance out with how bad the East is. Because if all the teams in the bottom are like 10 games below 500,
it'll be a 6-way tie for 10.
It'll be an insane finish at the end of the season. Yeah. As long as they keep prioritizing development over wins, they're going to be fine. And plus, it's going to take a little bit. Once everybody is back, say everyone is back before the deadline, they're not going to start playing the way that we might think they would right away, right? It'll take a few games.
Yeah. Okay, on that note about development, like I said, right from the beginning of the year, Darko Rajakovic talked about the process over the results. I think we have a split couch here in terms of Darko support and not support for Darko, if that's what you want to call it for Chandler. So let's get into the head coach of this team, who really, it's hard to judge him so far in Toronto because last year was a mess. Like, I don't know how you judge anyone coaching that team. They had guys that starting the year, you knew Pascal probably wasn't going to be there. Darko was implementing a system that didn't even accentuate Pascal's strengths. Then he gets traded midseason. OG was traded midseason. Barnes gets hurt late in the year. So that was kind of a wash. And then this year, you're coming into the year openly, admitting it's a rebuilding season. Everyone can read between the lines. They're tanking. Hard to put too much of the record on him. For my money, I think Darko has struck the right balance between keeping a young losing team upbeat and engaged, positive, while still holding them accountable. The Ochai Agbaji thing, we can talk about that. I'd like to hear your thoughts. Do you agree with that? Has he struck that right balance, or do you just see a coach who's not a winning coach in the NBA?
I'll let the negativity go first.
So I wasn't even listening because you painted me with such a broad brush. I'm not a Darko hater. I just didn't get a great first impression of him, like the Gatorade bath or whatever in the locker room after his first win. It seemed like, such a rah kind of motivator guy, and I typically trend towards the sort of X's and O's coaches more than the consummate motivators, because I think those coaches sort of run the risk of getting stale with their messages. But what I will say this year, before you cut me off, Keeks, which you're completely entitled to do, but you're absolutely right. They're doing an ethical tank, and they're leaning heavily on rookies. And when you depend heavily on these rookies, like the aforementioned four that I mentioned, their little errors can be attributed to them and not coaching issues. So it's really a win-win scenario right now for Darko. I have a lot more patience for him now. I would like to see more. I still think the sample size this year is a little too small, 21 games, but I have faith that he's motivating the right people and enabling the right people to succeed at their highest levels.
So he's probably going to go into year 3 as an NBA head coach with less than 60 wins to his name. So Keeks, tell us why you're still high on Darko despite that.
I have not seen a coach get as much buy-in, 1 through 18, on a roster that has set out saying, we're tanking, we're rebuilding, we're going to be losing. He has, I think every single player on that roster would go run through a wall for him, which has been clear from day one of the season. Even with some of these stats going back to, are they too good to tank or whatever, the 11 of their 21 games decided by 6 points or less. They've had a lead or been within 7 points in the fourth in 13 of 15 losses. So he has them fighting through the end, except for that first game against the Cavs. They've been fighting through the end in every game this year. Yeah. Even though they're losing, but the vibes are immaculate. I've never seen a team that's seems this together. At least a Raptors team that's losing like this.
And to the front office's point, that is what he was hired for. That might that sounds like a criticism of him in the sense of he was hired to be a developmental coach, like a rebuilding coach, but that literally is what he was hired for, to boost Scotty Barnes's on-court production and get the most out of him. I don't think anyone can really argue that against that. I think he has gotten the most out of Scotty. I will say I've taken issue with a couple crunch time.
Yes.
Decisions and errors Darko has made in some of these close games, like his timeout management, what they run coming out of timeouts, game management in general, whether you call it, all of those things I think have been knocks against him. But I will say that I think he's done enough for a rebuilding team and for what their purpose is that I don't think you can put any of this at his feet. And then who knows, maybe they get one of these high picks, they go into next year trying to compete on some level, and that's when we can maybe start judging him.
I think he's also in his second year as a head coach, which the in-game adjustments and things I think are things he can learn and get better at as he grows with the team, or whether he does or doesn't. The Ted Lasso part of him is what I like to call him as the motivating, the developmental part of him. It's not something you can teach, right?
That's fair.
I think six Raptors, 7 including Scotty, are averaging more points this year under Darko than they did last year.
Incredible. But there might not be another coach in the NBA who's under less pressure
than
Darko. And with Masai Ujiri in the offseason finally acknowledging publicly that it's a rebuild, that's a huge burden off Darko's shoulder. So again, the sample size is too small, but I'm not a hater. I like what I've seen. And to Keek's credit, she's down at the arena every single day. She's seeing the things that the public aren't seeing. And if she can speak to Darko as being like a motivator 1 through 18, then I trust her judgment on that.
Even with like the way he's willing to call people out, like I think against the Heat on Friday night, Chris Boucher had a rough stretch to start, and Darko had already used a challenge.
I mean, you didn't even have to say Friday again. You could have just said in any of the 21 games where Chris Boucher had a rough start.
But Darko got right in his face and like went at him for the multiple mistakes that he made, and then Chris like owned up to it, went back, and then he played a little bit better. Yeah. But for the most part, when Darko calls an angry Chris Boucher timeout, which he does
once a game, every coach who's ever coached
Boucher comes out playing much better.
Yeah.
Even him having rotation minutes this year is a credit to Darko compared to last year where he just didn't fit the schemes.
If they end up turning Boucher into any kind of value on the trade market, that is a credit a coach of a rebuilding team gets. Again, he did this he called out Ochai Agbaji after a game in the media, even though he's having a good year. Ochai responded. The one last thing I'll mention with Darko as well, because their offense isn't good when it comes to the results, but I think it's a perfect microcosm of the team in that I think the process is actually okay. Like if you look at, like they don't have enough shooting and they don't take enough threes.
They're
getting quickly back will help. Right. Getting quickly back will help in that regard, but they in general don't have enough shooting. But then you look at it and it's like they are top 3 in attempts at the rim, top 3 in points in the paint. I think first or top 3 in fast break points.
Yep.
Like they're using their youth, their speed, their athleticism, they're cutting the ball movement that Darko emphasizes to get easy looks everywhere but from deep because they just don't have the talent. Again, I think all these little things for a coach in his position are little wins where you can say, look, the process is good. As we get more talent, this could work, but it is still, a wins and losses business. And he's going to go into year 3 with a very ugly record. Next year's probably the prove it year for him. Some coaches never get 3 years, right?
Even as like a quick add, even their defensive splits, first 11, last 10, they were horrific to start defensively.
Yeah. They were the worst defensive team.
They were the worst defensive team.
Now they're top 10.
They've been top 10 since. Like they've looked, even eye test wise, the defense has been much better. They look like they know what they're doing.
Scotty's been great defensively. That's another thing too. All right. I think that's enough Raptors talk. That segment was presented by Under Armour and Curry Brand. We appreciate them for that sponsorship. We can move on now to some more league-wide topics. Earlier this week, ESPN put up their annual 25 under 25, top 25, 25 and under players in the league. Not that surprising that 1-2 on that list were Victor Wembanyama and Anthony Edwards. Maybe not that surprising that Wembanyama was number 1, although I think some people would take issue with that based on Ant's track record so far. So I'm going to throw it to you guys, Chandler. We can start with you this time. Are you in agreement that Victor Wembanyama is already the best 25 and under talent in the league? Who would you take between Victor Wembanyama and Anthony Edwards right now, building a team if you're a GM?
This is not even a debate to me, like with all due respect to Ant, who is probably on that list, the best natural scorer. Seems to be a very charismatic person who's very marketable. And for a market in Minnesota that struggles so much with retaining stars, it's incredible to have a player of his caliber. But this is Wemby, like so clear for me. Are you kidding me? Like just this week, he became just a third person in NBA history to record a 34-point triple-double, and I know that's sort of an arbitrary number, 34-point, but triple-double before the age of 21, joining LeBron James and Luka Doncic, who are both like pretty decent players, you know what I mean? So, and it's not even a question for me what he does at both ends compared to an Ant or even a Paolo Banchero, who was third on the list.
That's Banchero.
Banchero, my apologies.
Let's get those Italian pronunciations correct.
My apologies. My sincere apologies to the Italian community. But with Wemby, it's what he does at the defensive end too. Obviously, he's working out a few kinks at the offensive end, and he's spending too much time on the perimeter, where I think he should be developing his post game a little bit more. But with the countable stats with Wemby are insane. The blocks, the steals, the stocks.
He's been in the league 2 years. He's leading the league in blocks for the second year.
Ridiculous. But there's also the immeasurable stats, where it's shots altered. It's the attack of the offensive players altering their approach. And I forget exactly what the quote was verbatim last year, but it was after a game against the Minnesota Timberwolves, and it really stuck out to me. And head coach of the Timberwolves, Chris Finch, said, I think our players were a little too aware of him, and they were just altering their entire approach, sort of in fear of, one of the most elite rim protectors we've ever seen. And he doesn't turn 21 until January. Like he's to me, I think he's going to be the best basketball player on the entire planet in like 3 or 4 years. And again, with all due respect to Ant, it's just not even a discussion for me.
One note on the Wemby, the defensive stats. So his defensive field goal percentage at the rim, so any attempts at the rim when Wemby is the closest defender, players are shooting less than 40%. At the rim, our guy Joe Wolfon, feature writer here at theScore, in a stats piece we did last week, had a great line where he said essentially an attempt at the rim against Victor Wembanyama has the same chance of going in as a Royce O'Neal three-pointer. Like, his defense is insane.
I think it's easily, without a question, Wemby as well. I think he's lived up to the expectations for Wemby since he got into the league have been immense, even since before. He's pretty much lived up to every single thing that we thought he could be doing, and sometimes exceeded them. I think a lot of times exceeded them. But even with the steps he's taking in his own development, working with the Spurs, obviously, early on I was a little annoyed at how many threes he was taking. I thought, no, you're 7'4", develop your post game more, be more in the paint, drive. Like there are other skills than the three. And he wasn't playing well. I think it was 18 points a game, 7 threes, 22.6% from three, and still 3.7 blocks somehow.
And also look at that 3.6 assists per game compared to 3.7 by Ant. Look at who Wemby is passing to compared to the number of all-star caliber players Ant has. And I mean that in complete disrespect to Jeremy Sochan and other Spurs
Hey, Chris
players.
Paul's on there too.
Ah, well, whatever.
But to your point, he's now shooting.
8 games since, 31 points. He's taking 12 threes a game in 8 games since. So 7. I was saying 7 was too many. He's taking 12 threes, shooting 42%.
That is like
42%.
I need people to understand how outrageous that is to shoot a 7'4" dude taking 12 threes a game, but making them at a 42% clip. Those are literally Steph Curry, not an exaggeration, Steph Curry numbers.
Yes.
You and I played together in that charity tournament. And I didn't make a single three-pointer. It's incredibly difficult to shoot 40. What was it? 42%.
40% on 12 threes a game in his last.
12 threes a game in the last 8, and still 4 blocks a game.
Yeah, it's unreal. I guess, look, I'm going to make it unanimous. I would also take Victor Wembanyama over Anthony Edwards if I was a GM starting a team today. I just think the two-way ability, the uniqueness of his talent, the way he lifts a team's floor. I think I mentioned it on this show coming into the year. I had the Spurs as a sleeper. They're making me look good right now, over 500 a quarter of the way through the season. And the reason I said it was because even though the rest of the team doesn't look that good, if Wembanyama was just a little better than he was last year, he would become a 4 VORP player in terms of value over replacement. I know it's a very specific stat, similar to baseball's WAR. And then I went back and looked at the last 5 years. Every player that's been a 4 VORP player has been at the very least on a top 10 team in the conference, except the year Doncic's Mavs purposely tanked to keep a pick. And the point I was trying to make was that in basketball, in the NBA, if you have a player that good, it's really difficult to be very bad.
Yeah.
And even in a really tough Western Conference, is Wemby was going to be as good as I thought he was this year, and he has been, it's hard to lose a lot of games. Like, they're going to be in it. And I think they're proving that right now. Now, to their credit, they also won some games when he was out. To play a little devil's advocate, because we did unanimously go Wemby here, I will say the things going in Ant's favor is, one, we've seen him do it already in the playoffs. The guy's the ultimate big game performer, playoff performer. There's also like a precedent there in our minds and what we expect of championship level alphas, in that he's a big guard, like big wing, right? That dominates the ball, more of a scorer, like that. That's the precedent, right? That's the mold of a championship alpha. So I'll give him that. Like I said, we've seen him do it in the playoffs as well. There's an it factor and a moxie about him that you can't quantify, that I do think a lot of GMs would even say, I want that guy on my team.
Some swag.
And then the last thing I'll say, and this is, listen, no one wants to see anyone get hurt. We hope Wemby is able to defy the odds as a super big man and not get hurt. But one stat I had found last year while putting together an Unfiltered episode on Wemby was that, so of the 26 players, 7'3" or taller, who've played in the association, none ever reached 900 career games. Some of that can obviously be attributed to the fact those players just weren't any good. But even if you take the 5 retired players, 7'3" or taller, who made at least one All-Star team, the average career length was 1 game longer than the injury-plagued career of Penny Hardaway. Yao Ming and Ralph Sampson, the only 2 players 7'3" or taller to make an All-NBA team, the average length of their careers, 471 games. The average career length of every other All-NBA player, 1,017 games. The point being is that players that big are usually... It would be pretty much unprecedented for a player as big as Victor Wembanyama to have a very long career. We hope he breaks the mold.
This guy turns his phone off at 9:30 p.m. He reads a book before he goes to sleep.
Does those toe stretches.
He does toe stretches. He doesn't apparently has zero vices.
Yeah. Also, like the technology advancements and like physiotherapy or whatever, completely different. And I mean, this is not the discussion we're having, but I think about the whole GOAT talk about Jordan or LeBron, and LeBron at the end of every game is going in like a cryogenic chamber, and Jordan was blasting cigars and playing Texas Hold'em. You know what I mean? It's completely different era. So, valid point with the likes of Ralph Sampson and Yao Ming, like foot injuries have plagued big players, and we'll see. Hopefully Zach Edey, a local boy, can have a lengthy career despite also fitting in that 7'3" or taller group. But I think Wemby's just a completely different talent and unlike anything we've ever seen. So I'm trying not to compare him to those who've come before him.
And I don't want, like I said, just playing a little devil's advocate. If you're an executive, those might be some of the things you're thinking of where it's like, okay, there's no dispute who the more talented player is, but if you look at it in terms of like, who do we actually believe will be here for the long haul and carry us 7 years from now? I think there are some executives who might lean Ant. Of course, the way contracts are, you maybe can't look that far ahead anyway.
I mean, the Timberwolves keep looking like they do. I don't even know if Ant stays past the end of his contract.
That is a very fair point because they have botched that team for financial reasons. Doesn't every fan love that? First time they got to feel good in Minnesota in 20 years. And, actually, guys, we need to save some money, so...
I have good news. Julius Randle's on an expiring contract. I actually saw a stat today that he has one block this season in something like 600 minutes played, which is joint worst block ratio for a big in NBA history with Adam Morrison. What are we even doing anyways?
And Dante obviously has not been.
Yeah, no. Minnesota's in shambles. But Ant, still a top 2 25 and under player in the league, and that's at least a good starting point. Wemby, odds-on favorite to win Defensive Player of the Year. Don't think anyone's going to challenge him there. But there are a few surprising awards favorites at the quarter mark of the season. I want to talk a little bit about them with you guys. So my question for the both of you is, of the 3 surprising favorites to win awards right now, Franz Wagner for Most Improved Player, Peyton Pritchard for Sixth Man of the Year, or Jared McCain for Rookie of the Year. Which of those 3 do you think has the most staying power and actually has the best chance to win that award?
Pritchard for me, like by far. Easily. Bronze, I think if once Banchero's back, his numbers could take a dip. We don't know how he's been amazing, but his numbers could take a dip. McCain, who knows what the hell the Sixers are going to do. Once Embiid and PG are back, his minutes, like we know Nick Nurse and his minutes distribution sometimes, like McCain's minutes could drop, or even a better rookie on a team with a winning record could kind of come up. Even like Stephon Castle, Dalton Knecht, if the Lakers kind of turn it back around.
How funny is it that a quarter of the way through the season, we're talking about a Sixers rookie and saying a rookie on a winning team like the Spurs could be the Sixers rookie because he's a loser, like he's on a losing team.
Yeah, that's didn't think about the irony there. That's true. But any of those things could happen. Pritchard has been the most consistent all year, leading the NBA in bench scoring by a mile. I think it's like 75 more points off the bench than the next guy. 8 20-point games, which is the most by a bench player, most off the bench this season. 4 straight. He scored 20 points in 4 straight games off the bench.
Wow.
He's 3rd on the Celtics in 20-point games.
Give him MVP then. And look, Keeks, I actually agree with you that Peyton Pritchard, based entirely on what you said, noted crypto scammer Peyton Pritchard, I think he does have the most staying power there. I'm going to kind of vouch for McCain, who... It's really funny to look back at the 2024 NBA draft because the 2 leading candidates for Rookie of the Year were the 16th overall pick, Jared McCain, and the player picked after him, Connect 4, Dalton Knecht. A lot of people really mis-scouted this draft.
Yes.
And I think it was a great move to get a guy in who's going to be an immediate help, especially if you're kind of flirting with the tax apron. McCain's averaging 16 points a game, shooting 53% from the field. He's also shooting 90% at the charity stripe. Nick Nurse has to give this guy minutes, and recently recently, with injuries to Kyle Lowry and Reggie Jackson, Nurse has been using McCain as a backup point guard. So McCain is making himself more valuable. Granted, and we talked earlier about a team besieged by injuries, the Raptors. No one's felt injuries more than the Sixers. I think the big three of Tyrese Maxey.
The Pelicans would have an argument.
Yeah.
Sure, but Tyrese Maxey, Paul George,
Even the
and
Grizzlies
Joel
a little
Embiid
bit.
have played 2 times together. Twice, right?
Yeah.
So, of course, when they return, there may be less offensive contributions for McCain, but he's still going to get minutes. He's still of incredible value to that team. And from the outside looking in, as someone who watches his YouTube, he's leading the NBA in
His
YouTube
TikTok
contributions,
views.
TikTok, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
He seems like a really likable young man, and that translates to being very coachable. And there's always a room in the NBA for a player like that.
See, this is where we go back, though, to I think you were talking earlier about motivational coaches versus X's and O's coaches. Nick Nurse, very much an X's and O's,
course.
not a personality guy, not a locker room guy, as we've kind of seen a little bit
In Toronto, yeah.
in Toronto.
Are you saying he leaked that locker room mishap and then Joel
Confirm nor
Embiid
deny
called him
that.
out?
I will say that he does not seem like the
Reportedly?
kind of guy that likes his players on TikTok all day after losses and stuff.
No, I just don't know. Knowing what we know about how Nick Nurse runs a rotation, I'm not sure how much leeway he'll give McCain once everyone's
Well,
back.
McCain's also, for a rookie, an above-average defender and an above-average passer.
Yes.
So he kind of runs a gamut for the whole skill set.
Yep.
So in terms of looking, it's impossible to project how many minutes he will get when the big three return, but he does all the little things. And for a losing team, you need someone who does all the little things and checks
Losing
off
team.
all the boxes.
I agree. I hope he maintains and gets minutes.
He's arguably been their best player
Yes.
this season. He's the favorite right now. I feel like he's not going to hold on and win that award. Pritchard, I do think, will win sixth man. Listen, if you go back to the preseason, and I know people, don't put a lot of stock in the preseason, and from a wins and losses perspective, you shouldn't. But a lot of times you can tell who some of the most improved players are going to be when they're off the charts good in the
Yeah.
preseason. Not just good, off the charts good. Peyton Pritchard was that. He was arguably the best player in the preseason, and he's carried that over into the regular season. But my pick here, to me, this one's as easy as you guys saying Wembanyama was easy, and that's Franz Wagner for MIP. Look, if you look at some of the numbers and what Franz Wagner has
been
done,
amazing.
particularly since Paolo Banchero went out, the Magic were sputtering when Paolo went down. Easily could have been a team that splinters and falls apart, disappointing after a good year last year. Instead, they rally around Franz. Franz is putting up, forget MIP, he's putting up MVP type numbers the last few
in his
weeks.
last 10.
He has
26, 6, 7.
in his last 10 games.
his
And the
last 10
Magic have
games.
what, 9 of those?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, he's been unbelievable on both ends of the court. He's also a very good defender for what's been the best defensive team in the league since Paolo went down. I just think this he's been the best player in one of the best teams in the league without their actual best player. Like I said, I think if you were doing a quarter season MVP poll and talking to people actually watching the games, he'd be top 5, top 10 at worst. MIP, he's running away with it. I know we were talking a little off air. You were mentioning if and when Paolo comes back, it's going to hurt his case. But I just feel like he has put so much distance already between him and someone else that if he dips a little bit from this, he's still the most improved player, no?
It depends on how much of it he kind of maintains. I think even just a quick glance at their schedule in the last 13, so they're 12-1 in the last 13. 2 of those wins have come against the Nets, 1 against the Bulls, the Hornets, the Pistons, the Lakers, who are struggling. They lost against the Clippers, the Suns, who I believe were without KD and Beal, the Pacers, who are the most confusing team in the NBA, the Hornets, the Wizards, and the Pelicans.
Yeah, not exactly a murderer's row. All right, so maybe more
think
like
there's
G League
one-
MVP. Not
Sure, but also most improved has sort of the most variance for the criteria.
Yes.
Like 6th man of the year, it's the best player off the bench.
Yep.
Rookie of the year, it's pretty definite that it's a first-year player or Ben Simmons now, whatever. But with most improved, different voters view it through a different lens. And sometimes we saw earlier in the year where Grady Dick was getting a lot of mentions for most improved. And I think it's ridiculous to have a second-year player be eligible for most improved because the rookie year is such sort of a clean slate, a tabula rasa, where you cannot judge a player. So then the second year seems shouldn't be a factor, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. But with Franz
I've heard that
Wagner,
argument before. I hate it. I'm just like, I know you go. I'm
supposed to get
going against
better.
both of you guys here. But shouldn't the Most Improved Player award go to? And I love that we're having this debate, even though Franz is not a second-year player. But I'm good. Let's have the debate anyway. Should it not go to the player who was already in the NBA who improved the most year to year?
No, because the guidelines is like Grady first didn't play in most of their games last year. He was not in the rotation for the first half of the year. He had that special program. Again, Grady has been amazing. I would love, unfortunately, for him to win, but my baseline rule is second year shouldn't. He barely played. If you go straight by numbers improvement, it's sure he has the largest scoring increase, and that's amazing, but it doesn't really count, I think, to me, because he was not in the rotation the first half of the year.
So isn't that a sign of improvement that he wasn't in the rotation?
First half of the year, the Raptors were going through insanity, right?
Fair, yeah.
Trades.
No, I liked it. I like this healthy debate.
it's your show. It's Unfiltered, hosted by Joseph Casciaro,
Yeah.
not Keeks or Michael. But
even though Chandler did try to do a hosting gig before we actually started recording.
I'm still waiting on my Curry 12s to our friends at Under Armour. But I think we also mentioned this, and I don't want to belabor the point too much, but Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner, Banchero, I'm really, really sorry. Banchero and Wagner are both wings.
Yeah.
They do a lot of similar things.
Fair.
I don't know how much will be taken away or taken off of Franz's plate when Banchero returns, but they play the same position. And it's really interesting to know because on that ESPN top 25 under 25, Banchero was third and Franz Wagner was fourth. And I kind of stepped back and said, wow, this team is building the best wing tandem in the entire NBA. I'm kind of refuting my earlier point, too, that it's going to be McCain because I completely agree with Pritchard. I'm just riding with Keeks here. And I like Franz Wagner. I think he's a really good player.
Wagner.
But
So you think Pritchard is going to go six-man and most improved?
yes,
that's
and Rookie of the Year, the trifecta.
The Ben Simmons. All right. This is the kind of banter and healthy debate we want here on the Unfiltered Show. So thank you very much. For Chandler, for Keeks, for Zach and Adrian in the control room, my name is Joseph Casciaro. This has been the Unfiltered Show presented by Under Armour and Curry Brand. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time.